first and most popular both in Poland and Europe is making use of natural gas for cogeneration purposes. And we use the fermentation process to produce biogas, and then raw unclean gas is burned in cogeneration engines to generate both electricity and heat. And limitations of the models is that we need to locate the installation where there are available resources. I mean, in areas of big agricultural production to make this biogas most available. And actually, most of these installations are located in less developed rural areas. And unfortunately, within those areas, the electric grid is not so well developed, so we cannot take the electricity from over there to big industrial centers and big cities. And in Western Europe, it has been already noticed, and this is also taking place in Poland, to redirect our efforts to generate biogas as the gas fuel, to transfer it through distribution networks or in the form of LNG to the place where this biogas is most needed and where it can be most effectively used, first of all, for generation of electricity and thermal energy. So directions of the development of the gas sector are going in these two directions. The original one, I mean generation of electricity in areas where there is an easy access to biodegradable resources, and the new industry in the form of generating gas fuel, as you could see in our presentation. In other words, the biogas that could be cleaned and conditioned to the quality of gas fuel, or adjusted to the bioLNG parameters, because we don't want to transport some unneeded components of this biofuel. So these are the main elements that are bringing the development of the gas sector, and today we'd like to focus on the biomethane leg of this process. I mean, making biomethane and cleaning it up to the biofuel quality. Now I'd like to tell you a few words about directions of the intervention of the European legislator in this first perspective, financial perspective of 2020. Now we see that more and more regulations will go towards development of gas and transport regulations. And of course, I'm not able to describe all the elements, so I will focus on 2 or 3 main elements. First of all, the European legislator indicates in the gas directive that competitive rules for the natural gas system will be also applicable for the gas installations. I mean, for installation for generation of biomethane. So this generation and transfer should be provided on non-discriminatory rules. And the European legislator also indicates that the member state can slightly limit access to this fuel because of safety reasons. And in the same time, the European legislator doesn't indicate any consistent parameters, I mean the quality of the gas fuel, leaving it to regulations of individual member states. And it seems that in the next financial perspective, there will be an effort to standardize the qualitative parameters of biometans at the level of the European Union to provide uniform quality parameters of the gas fuel to allow for pan-European trade of biogas fuels. Now let me tell you a few words about the support system. I mean, we leave this technical part and access to the market. I'd like to tell you a few words about the new directive RED II about use of renewable energy sources in the EU's economy that refers very strongly to providing support to energy generation in the form of biogas. First of all, expressly, the European legislator found out that biogas is to be a gas fuel originating from renewable energy sources. This is the basic element showing how these renewable energy sources are to be used in the gas sector. So the biogas is the gas fuel from renewable energy sources that is to play a main role in making the European economy greener. In order to support those efforts, the European legislator indicates that it is possible to create a support system for this kind of gas fuel. So in other words, investors or energy generators can expect some operational support from individual member states, and this support will be in line with the EU's rules for the state support, state assistance for the energy sector. And this has been already developed very strongly in the electric energy sector, and we may follow that example to transfer it into the gas sector. And the European regulations give quite a lot of liberty to member states in shaping the rules for the gas trading market. We have the certificates of origin, and in the gas sector, European legislations give a lot of freedom, and we may keep this in mind, creating operational support for generation of gas fuel in the form of biogas. And the European legislator is very strongly pointing out that individual member states should provide very high level of stability to these trading instruments. I'd like to tell you also that the RED II directive is also emphasizing very strongly the role of making the transport sector greener. The basic regulation in this area says that up to 2030, 14% of the energy used in transport sector should come from renewable energy sources. In the basic perspective, as far as you know, the main benefit of making use of this renewable energy is to make greener fuel, liquid fuel, I mean bioethanol, and using some bio additives to petrol. And blending has some technical limitations, so we cannot add as much of these bio components to petrol as we want. And the main element that could be implemented for fuel, liquid fuel, is the biogas that could be used as the bio component. I mean, the component added to liquid fuels to make them greener. And this transportation fuels of second generation, I mean fuels made from waste substrates originally used for generation of biogas, and then this waste will be used in refineries to make liquid fuel for the transport industry. And in the same time, there are some mandatory limits that are to make the member state to implement these fuels. 2% of energy used by transport industry should be 2%, and in 2030 as much as 3.5% of all fuels used by the transport industry is to be originating from these biofuels. And an important role could be played by biomethane, and what's more, use of gas fuels from renewable energy sources in the transport sector could be used to double the contribution of biofuels, and this will be another incentive to use these biofuels in transport industry. Now I'd like to switch to national regulations, how this is regulated in Polish legislation. Unfortunately, we have some kind of a definition chaos in Polish legislation. There is no definition of biomethane in the national legislation, but we have some other notions. First of all, the agricultural biogas is defined as the basic elements for development of the biomethane fuels obtained from methane fermentation, and the range of available substrates is very extensive. I mean, big variety of various agricultural waste, excluding only those components that come from wastewater treatment plants or landfills, and we have not completely explained status of municipal waste, so we don't know whether they could be used for generation of biogas or not. So for the time being, we are not allowed to make use of this municipal waste to generate biomethane, but probably in the future this will be possible. Another definition of biofuels, I believe that you know this very well from the energy law, the high methane natural gas and agricultural biogas is considered to be a gas fuel in Poland, and oppositely to the other definitions, the gas fuel in the meaning of national regulations is also the agricultural biogas in the gas form or in liquefied form. We have also regulations about the liquid fuel biocomponents, and the gas industry is preparing for accepting these new opportunities to provide biomethane to the market. And some time ago, some definitions were developed to defining what's liquefied biomethane, and it could be used as an additive for classical liquid fuel like diesel fuel or petrol, and this could be also used directly as a fuel for motor vehicles or for ships.
Substrate base in Poland is quite big, you should not only look at from the standpoint of generation costs of energy and managing the sector connected with nitrogen contamination and production of biogas, not only to source gas fuel, but also a number of problems. Even more so, there is this stability factor in production and delivery of gas fuels, unlike other types of energy, which we can easily store in places where it's not used. So it slips our attention that a lot of energy and also a lot is connected with Polish suppliers who will support the economic development in Poland and use Polish substrates, and it will bring beneficial solutions to the whole Polish economy at large. And over the 5 years in the energy sector and activities, and we have to cope with it. So this meant that we use heavy substrates and use biotechnological solutions in substrate strategy, and they were using classical substrates and on which the technologies are based in search of substrates that...
So we may use this location to avoid this limitation for all year long introduction of gas fuel, and of course distribution companies are open and willing to join this after years of experience to accept the biogas, but these local companies could locally distribute the gas fuel, and in the summertime this could be quite limited. In our opinion, this is announcing very big LNG potential that could support many biogas generating plant that has problems in hooking up to the distribution network of natural gas. Another element that limits development of biomethane is lack of some practical solutions. We have some theoretical tools, but the legislator prevents use of the operational support of generation of gas biofuel, and there is no dedicated auction system for selling of biogas and entering it into the national gas grid. So there is no economic incentive to provide this biofuel for the gas sector, and taking into account interests of the LNG industry, it would be worth to support this idea to extend this support system to cover not only the distribution networks, but also to cover installations used for generation of biogas, liquefying it and transporting it in liquefied form using raw tankers. Today we may obtain support only for the gas fuel that is introduced into the distribution network, and in our opinion it would be worth to extend this to cover also liquefying biogas liquefying plants, and to cover also wastewater treatment plant in big cities, to cover this kind of installation with the state support. And another very important limitation that I mentioned before is the volume of investments to build biogas plants and the associated infrastructure to provide delivery of the biogas to consumers. And these investments are taking place in Poland, and we may limit further use of fossil fuels, the more that we have also a kind of synergy effect to make use of all possible support tools.
Investment those programs and may mobilize local heat industry to be interested in the use not only of natural gas but also green gas as biometan or delivered via bioLNG. But the biggest interest in the use of biomethane, which resulted from EU regulations, is the transport sector that has to introduce advanced second generation fuels that are generated on the base of biodegradable waste treatment plants, and they can use biomethane that will be generated, and for the technological process they will use the niche with regard to direct tanking of bioLNG, or in the future maybe potentially to navigation from Scandinavian countries which can be interested in it. We also have to look at the next slide, please. Here it's a diagram. I presented how can the biogas produced, and then there is the element of cleansing biogas, so arriving at parameters functioning in the gas network, and we can get prepared to transport, which will generate liquid fuels with the addition of biohydrogen, and there will be biomethane. We can sell biomethane, and also if we have limitations connected with distribution of the gas, we can build liquefying installations and liquefy biomethane in the form of bioLNG that can be delivered both to refineries and buyers who would like to use this fuel for own needs, for tanking or for other needs or other energy needs. And the last slide, please. In summary, we will indicate in which elements the LNG industry should operate with regard to the possibility of creating legal regulations. Of course, the auction element, where you have subsidies to the generated gas fuel, and also its extension to include the element of support to biogas, but also biogas that will be transported via bioLNG. The demands with regard to broadening of substrate base, in particular for large wastewater treatment plants, so the biogas potential is covered by the support system, and also the municipal substances that help use of it in large cities. The Ministry of Climate has been working analytically in the context of reforming the support system for biomethane, and the direction of works is such that we leave the auction system for big installations and broaden it for a simplified system of guaranteed bonuses, so without the need for competitive bidding and auction subsidies to all installations that will be generating such gas fuel. And finally, transport sector, where biomethane will be needed either via gas network, also delivered as bioLNG or liquid fuel. Here we can perceive a significant element of collaboration in the transport sector, but the need there is to develop methodology of calculating the share of greenness of biomethane or for transport purposes. Just final slides. If you are interested in biogas, we recommend our publication where you can read about it more broadly. And of course, if there are any questions, I'm available for you for questions about development of biomethane or bioLNG. Thank you very much for invitation and for bearing with me. Thank you, Martin. I think you heavily developed the whole subject. I encourage our next speakers and guests to be more disciplined about time. At any rate, we'll be discussing the aspects mentioned by Martin in various aspects. But now I would like to cordially policy officer from the European Commission who will present the situation, how LNG is perceived in the context of European Green Deal and how Poland can use funds we mentioned earlier for LNG. Łukasz, the floor is yours.
Green order is a kind of a message supporting and painting the vision, but I believe that in this context we should switch to the strategies that have been published recently, and they have a direct effect on the energy sector, especially the gas sector, including LNG. So this is the strategy about integration of the energy systems, the Union strategy referring to hydrogen and development of the hydrogen network and hydrogen economy in the Union, and also EU strategy referring to reduction of the methane reduction. The last one dated October 14th of this year, and actually each of these strategies contains some kind of actions of both legislative and non-legislative nature that either have been already launched by the European Commission or they will be launched in 2021. And in case of legislation, they will be negotiated over the whole mandate of the current Commission. Next slide, please. Energy carriers. I believe that this shows properly at what directions we are going, and this was already mentioned before. So, as we know, the Green Deal sets the target obtaining the neutrality in 2050, and Europe will be the first continent to achieve this goal. Of course, this is related to a big change in our way of thinking about energy, and especially I like to focus on the energy industry. As you could see, our energy mix in Europe of 28 member states, on the right is the energy mix according to the data and models of the long-term strategy presented by the Commission for 2050. What is striking here is that energy consumption will go down a little bit, but it will be similar to the existing level. However, the key point is that electrification will go up to more than 40% comparing to 22% in 2000. And of course, we see here hydrogen that's coming into play, and it's getting into the future, and the quantity of gas fuels is reduced. So this is a significant change of the paradigm of the energy market functioning. And we may say that one of key things is definitely electrification. And this direction towards electrification is clearly indicated in the strategy referring to integration of energy systems I mentioned before. Next slide, please. We will see consumption of gas fuels now. Also from the perspective of long-term strategy for 2015, 30 and 50. Individual bars of various codes, they present various scenarios used to model the results of the long-term strategy. Of course, not everything could be predicted based on just a single scenario that will be implemented. And because of this, there are several variants here, taking into account, first of all, the price from the Paris Agreement. And what is striking is the fact that we see on one hand a drop in consumption of natural gas between 2015 and 2030, but it's not very dramatic. This drop is much bigger if we take into account the difference between 2030 and 2050. And in 2050, definitely hydrogen will come into play, and according to the scenario that's being analyzed for 2050, also biogas, but also 3 other synthetic gases. And now, moving quickly from electrification to the gas sector, I'd like to talk about development of the LNG market in Europe. And as I mentioned, gas was playing an important role in 2015. This is reflected by the data, and it is also clearly seen that gas will continue to play a very important role in Europe. Of course, there will be differences between particular regions. In some regions, it will be playing more significant role depending on many factors. But what can be seen is also the fact that the LNG market is growing very rapidly, especially in the recent years, recent 5 years, but it was just a stepwise growth. On one hand, we see a significant growth in volume and export of LNG into Europe, but also bigger and bigger convergence of prices between Europe and Asia. That can be seen on the right-hand graph. This means also that we have a little bit different conditions and environment also in terms of growth of the market and its potential. So on one hand, we have a chance for absorption and making use of bigger volume that will affect liquidity of the market, and also much bigger tendency for growth of short-term market is appearing. And we have also a long-term contract to secure security of deliveries. But also we see a trend for sustainable growth of trade. And all this results in the fact that Europe is able to absorb also the surplus, and it's becoming competitive comparing with the Asian market. And some people believe that Europe will continue to play a role of balancing market. Some other people believe that Europe will start taking over some part of the Asian market, and the whole situation is changing in the light of the existing crisis. So this growth will be very interesting, but definitely it can be seen that the market has been growing and it's changing, and this has various implications. This is the famous triangle within which we are moving in our EU energy policy. I mean, decarbonization, the market and price of energy, and security of deliveries. And now a question arises, what could be the role to be played by LNG and also natural gas? And of course, they are both interconnected. And on one hand, in the decarbonization perspective, as it was mentioned in the opening speech, there is a large potential for switching from coal to natural gas. And here we see quite a big potential for reduction of emissions. This is one of the threats. And another thing in the context of the hydrogen strategy is a possibility of using the routes for LNG for import of both renewable energy and green gas fuels. And we see, we look at this from the perspective of the hydrogen strategy, what kind of activities should be planned and implemented to support creation and operation of the hydrogen market, of course, without losing from our side the LNG market. And LNG also is used in a growing volume by the maritime transport. And of course, we have some prospect of the pricing arbitration and liquidity of the gas market. We see here also some interesting development towards this direction over the recent years. How you would be able to implement the arbitration procedures for the standard grid natural gas. And the last but not least important thing, security of deliveries. Of course, in the beginning of the development of LNG, when new LNG terminals were built, this issue was critical to provide security of deliveries to countries where the role of dominating supplier was very significant. And now we are thinking about building more interconnectors, and we may say that security of deliveries for the member states of the EU has been significantly improved over recent years. However, this issue remains to be very important, and in some areas this delivery security remains very important. And of course, when new gases are introduced, I mentioned, when they are introduced into the market, the issue of securing the delivery security will be very important. To wrap it up, I believe that we should look at the role of LNG in the context of role of natural gas and decarbonization up to 2050, and I believe that this is a clear target. We know where we are going to up to 2050, and from the investor's perspective, we should take a look at this, and the issue of gases from renewable resources and decarbonization driven by this is very important thing, and this remain very important. also in the perspective of the forthcoming legislation activities, and this will be also important in terms of the classical role. I mean, liquidity of the market and security of deliveries will remain to be very important in the medium to short term perspective. And that's it from my side. Thank you very much. And I will be more than happy to answer your questions.
Łukasz, thank you very much for the session. We would like to invite you to the discussion panel that will follow shortly. We heard quite a few elements that are necessary from his presentation. A lot is needed to promote LNG and also this European perspective. What is the vision of conducting new alternative sources of energy to the mix, including LNG, and also during the panel we'll try to say how the two elements that were mentioned in the presentations impact the Polish situation and what we can do domestically. So that is why we decided to invite to the panel Łukasz Lisiecki from the European Commission, but also hopefully we have on the line Ms. Katarzyna Mierzbydła, Head of Sales of LNG for Poland, Baltic States and the Ukraine. We have Mr. Piotr Huś from the gas system that will tell us about the state or public zone or area from the standpoint of developing the gas network and the development of future FSL. I would like to cordially welcome Mr. Piotr Dobrzenko, President of LNG Systems, member and partner of the Polish LNG platform. Let's check whether everything is already connected. Everybody's already connected, and I wish you a nice panel. I would like to talk to Mr. Kuś and discuss in the perspective of Polish plans to build a terminal, as I mentioned. And what I would like to ask is the question of how LNG fits into gas system strategy. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. And maybe the first comment that maybe is not to play but has played a big role for a long time in our strategy. Maybe I will present later our new project in Gdańsk, and I will focus on specific investments. You well know that from 2016 we have around in Świętoujście and is being extended a new terminal. So it's a confirmation how big role for us it is for Polish market to witness increasing number of regasification capacity in Poland. I would like to relate to the role of LNG to what Łukasz said and to how we perceive the future of gas market, the future of LNG in the context of activities of gas system group of companies, how our concepts have evolved. And we can say that, of course, we have a vision of 2050. We go to the decarbonized economy. For each country, for each region, the road will be different. This path, in case of our region specifically, Central Europe and Eastern Europe and Poland, will be based on a very big role of natural gas and LNG, as was said. It's a perspective that we can see despite global forecasts for Europe that assume a drop in gas, we can see that LNG will increase its significance in energy mix. There will be stabilization or increase by 2040, 2050, so we'll be needing natural gas as fuel which is sustainable, so low emission fuel, fuel that is increasingly cheaper, and of course a fuel that guarantees security and safety. And of course we have this triangle that was shown, and it is transformed, it goes towards one node in works of the European Commission. But coming back to our history, well, LNG in our strategy is the fuel that can act as an integrator of the system, but we look at LNG as energy integrator. This LNG fuel will play a great role in the transformation of the economy in the sectors we discussed. So first of all, the source of cheap fuel that can be delivered to any place in the world at very attractive price, and customers may use and maintain the competitiveness in the market. The integrator also via the infrastructure and the fuel can integrate various areas of the economy, but heavy transport, road transport, maritime transport, that will be also a very important role to play. And also finally a fuel that will prepare in the first place regasified or delivered to various places as LNG. It will be a supplement to increasing share of renewables in our economy. So balancing role, but also preparing our system for further future, where both new gases like bioLNG or others with other decarbonized gases will take place. As was mentioned, it's a big road ahead of us, but we as operators are beginning to analyze these options with our partners, with other companies that have global coverage in such fuels. So LNG and natural gas are on this path to decarbonization in 2050, and they will in our system be playing still a very important role. Thank you very much. Łukasz, you heard about plans of gas system. What does EU have to say about it? We know that gas or LNG recently had certain problems, and the European Commission started to ponder whether such solutions have a chance and whether we should go in that direction. Are the things we are discussing now stand a chance of getting support from the EU in the form of funds or recovery and resilience? Thank you very much for the question. So maybe coming back quickly to the presentation I made a moment ago, as Peter said, this is very important from the perspective of investors, which is not comfortable for me to talk about investment proposal, but from the investment proposal you need to look at the long-term period and the issues of avoiding completing investments that at some point in time stop contribute to the objective. So we know what happens in 2050. Now it's the decision of every company, every country, how to program the transformation strategy. Of course, from the standpoint of the EU, there are quite a few instruments, also financial instruments, such as Just transition fund for transformation to be certain, so to speak. You are asking about budgetary solutions at that point in time. I think it's difficult to give a clear answer because those negotiations are still underway. So we don't know what the shape and support will be. We'll learn about it later. But I think that the trend is already clear, taking into account the policy of the European Investment Bank, discussions about taxonomy, discussions about the revision of TENI regulation in the context of the trend is clear in the sense that the hydrogen network, the refocusing of gas networks to adjust to renewable and decarbonized gases, this area is being supported in terms of strategic contribution. And now, of course, a question arises what to do with classical investments, as you mentioned, in the future. But as I said, this discussion is not yet completed. But I think that in this context, we should look at it, and we should look at it from the perspective of legislation that will be appearing starting from next year. So on the basis of hydrogen strategy and methane strategy, both strategies have quite big room for a possibility to focus as to the direction. It seems that our activities supporting promotion of LNG in Poland and at the level of the EU seem to be sensible. We'll be discussing about it during the third session. Coming back now to the project that the EU supported, having representatives of Remontowa with our case. What are the projects like for those who got support from the EU? At what stage of implementation they are? Maybe I will start from Katarzyna. Shell Poland, good morning. In line with our motion for co-funding from the EU, we have a network of 36 stations located in Europe along main corridors from Spain to eastern Poland. Now 21 LNG stations are in Europe and one in Poland. This is the status as of today. What are further plans? 39 stations, in what time perspective they would be opened? On an ongoing basis, we deal with procedures and construction permits. In Poland, we want to have stations in Świecko and Poznań. Peter, a project was started that was expected to be an innovation in connection with ECOS, how Remontowa Energy Systems is handling the LNG project that was to be created in Tri-City. Thank you very much. We are implementing two projects in conjunction with Lotos Group, and this project is suffering heavy delays owing to procedural issues. I would relate to previous statements that gas as such, in the form of mix of biogas and other gases, or LNG and gas, explored directly, at any rate, it will play a very important role, and the technologies play a very important role and will play a role in what we do today. And a similar situation exists in the R&D project in which we are involved. We are not only building LNG stations in our distribution network, but also distribution systems and logistic systems for the needs of transport in the northern part of Poland. please remember that this station with tanks is going to be built, and this is what we are going to have in our company. And unfortunately, this project was hindered by procedural problems. The requirements with regard to procedures and also environmental consents. This LNG, so to speak, still in a complicated manner. It's not one of the fuels that is heavily promoted. Still, it's a hardly known technology. But when it comes to the whole project itself, it's being implemented now. The schedule expects that in April we'll start commissioning of the stations. Great, thank you very much. You mentioned about barriers, procedural barriers connected with LNG and projects connected with LNG. We'll be discussing those barriers during the second session that will follow shortly. And now questions that we received, one of them being bioLNG liquefying installation. Do you have any information or awareness whether such installations are to be soon created in Poland? I have to say, I haven't heard anything of such things. We heard about 80 billion that PG9G wanted to invest in creating biomethane, but they didn't mention bio-liquefying station. Do you have any updates on that? Maybe I will ask Mr. Piotr from Gas System.
Currently, in the context of the strategy for new gases, we see quite a large interest in both biogas and biomethane in the market. And we are in the stage in Poland where those solutions are just being created, and certainly we'll be waiting for the first regulatory elements that are necessary for development of various segments of the market for these fuels. It's also worth to look not only at the EU strategy, but also what's going on in our country, what's about our decision makers' attitude. So we see how the local regulations are developed on this. And frankly speaking, we have no knowledge about any bioLNG project in Poland. And what about your plans in the perspective of bioLNG? Maybe Shell knows anything about the bioLNG project to be developed in Poland or any neighbor countries? Or maybe I will be the first to answer in the nearest future. Not, unfortunately, this will not be the case. However, if LNG is to remain in the game and be treated equally with other solutions that are environment friendly, so some mix of LNG with bioLNG seems to be the only future possible. However, we should keep in mind that there are big technical problems in liquefaction of bioLNG, and seems that everybody is just prevented by getting into this kind of business because of these problems. I never heard about anybody willing currently to invest into this kind of installations in Poland. We have very asymmetrical situation. All those who impose standards, directions are big state-owned corporations that are the biggest players who dictate the rules of the game. And smaller players have no possibility to get into this kind of investment projects. The more that actually we don't have such a large stream of biogas as, for example, already exists in Italy. And what about the point of view of a non-state-owned company? Do you have any plans of the biogas generation plants? In Poland, we are looking at the situation and we don't rule out such a possibility in the future, but we have no plans for the time being. Looking at our neighbor countries, Shell is going to commission a bioLNG liquefaction plant in Germany, and our partner within the bioLNG partner is going to open such a plant next year in Germany. And in Poland, we are looking at possible sources of bioLNG, and the time will show us what will happen next. There are many questions, and I hope that they will all be answered during next sessions. Thank you very much for being with us today, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. And now I'd like to invite you for a short break.